Hey everyone, today we're just going to be testing some games with the Arachne cosplay list, so same thing as the previous deck tech. If you're interested in hearing more about it, just go and check out that video. So we're paired against an Azalea right now, so we're going to be bringing in the standard equipment, Nerve Scalpel and Bite. No need to run Peeler against a Ranger, and then as we look at the sideboard, there's a couple interesting things to note. So first thing is I want to bring in a movable. Azalea has a lot of tall attacks, and so I'm pretty interested in playing more defensively and then starting to pivot into more fatigue-based game plan. We're going second, so that does mean we do have a little bit of tempo, but regardless, you're going to be bringing in a lot of D-reacts, and then the question is, do we want to bring something like Razor since we're going second, or do we want to bring in something like Oasis to have more counterplay to Azalea? I think I'd prefer to go with the Oasis, just because there are some anti-D-react cards that Azalea does run. But since we're going second, we're probably going to keep in most of our attack action cards. We're not going to be too defensive. But our turn one's not that great. I mean, if the Azalea just passes here, it's better than nothing. We can play the E-Strike, bottom the Isolate, and then we can play the Sack the Shifty. So coming back at Azalea for 9. Sack the Shifty actually does have a decent amount of targets because Azalea does have cards with more go again then Lexi, because you have things like knock, you have all of the pumps, you have some of the reload effects, so there are more hits for sure. And Sack the Shifty into Lexi. Sack the Shifty into Lexi is almost, strangely enough, not really worth playing, but you run it anyway because it's a 0 for 4 contract. We actually hit a Codex of Frailty, and knowing that they pitched one on turn 1, it's actually pretty good for us. Although our hand is missing a blue, which is going to make playing the immovable somewhat difficult. It really depends on what their card is, like their attack, if we're going to be able to block it out or not, but it does have a Seek and Destroy effect on it, so we can't bank on the immovable, and we probably have to play it this turn. Bolton Shot's not terrible. Oh wow, okay, so 13 Dominate. We actually do have a really good response to this though. So we're going to pitch the Command and Conquer and the Codex to play the immovable, then we're going to block with the Mask and annihilate the arm from hand. So this is going to, oh wait. Okay, we had to block with all of these, I believe. Okay. And we perfectly cover up 13 Dominate, nice. Means we deny a lot of effects, but some of the more important ones are going to be things like, they don't have a Ponder now, so it's going to make Arsenal somewhat more difficult for them. Lucifer is likely to hit, and I think I am more likely to mask a card like this. There are a decent amount of 2 blocks in the deck. I think ripping 2 cards off the top are likely to hit a silver. So we hit a Red in the Ledger and a Lace, so that's actually really good for us. Our turn on the Crackback's not terrible. At the very worst, we can pitch into Bite and then play Leave No Witnesses. Or we have a lot of options actually. We can pitch. Okay, there's a lot of stuff. So we have a few different lines. We could pitch the Blue Shred to play the Bite, attack for 1, and then attack with the Shakedown using the Tunic counter. And then if they don't block, we can Black Tech, make it hit, and then follow up with Leave No Witnesses, and then Arsenal E-Strike, or we can block with the E-Strike. We also can just block 9 and display the Leave No Witnesses as a 1-card hand for 4. Depends on what their returning card is. So it's a Dominate card. Oh, but that's tough. So, 9 Dominate is pretty good. Let me think about this for a second. We could pitch our E-Strike. No, there's pretty much there's no reason to. So I think we just do this. It's a pretty good 4-card hand from our opponent. We'll re-equip Mask of Perdition, and then we'll send the Shakedown and threaten the Black Text. So our opponent does have to block 6 on this, or else we just get to do a bunch of stuff. And I believe here, I actually might be tempted to use the Flick Knives, because us banishing a card means that we get better information on their hand, and there's a high likelihood that we're going to banish a non-attack here. So I actually think I will use Flick Knives. Especially because we're starting to pivot a little bit. So we'll name red. Okay. If we have our choice, I think we take the Lace with inertia. They have a blue spire sniping in hand. So we're gonna take the lace and then we'll send the leave no witnesses. Pretty good hand from us. Maybe it was a little bit unnecessary to use flick knives, but I wanted the possibility of getting to block sooner with flick. We're pretty happy with that exchange. We're still above 30 life. We have a pretty good returning hand here. We know a little bit about their hands. So we know there's a pump, and they have a blind card that they drew here. Our turn is probably just going to be Tunic and send Eradicate, depends on if they dominate or not. I will say, even though Uzuri hypothetically seems pretty good into Ranger, I actually think Azalea presents a lot of problems because the contract list wants to be very card efficient and you block more often than you play. And Azalea having dominate almost every single turn denies a lot of that. My opponent's going to Azalea here. They blind Azalea, I believe. And they hit a release attention. So depends on if they drew an arrow off a Death Dealer. Seems like they did. It's actually pretty good save on the Death Dealer draw, else they would have just bricked this turn and passed back to us. But here's one example of a time where we actually do get liberty to block pretty well. So I'm kind of interested in blocking for 9, either for 9 or for 6. So the reason for blocking for 9 is that I don't get the option to block very often with multiple cards. So saving my life total seems pretty nice. However, Isolate's a really powerful card to have an arsenal in this list because you run more cards you want to isolate swap in than you run isolate. So sometimes it's the swap that's hard to get. And then also I am slightly playing around the third Codex in deck. So also having a card to have an arsenal is also pretty nice for that. And since there was really no other really important on hit there, it made sense to me to just take the damage from it. Not exactly ready to block a Mask of Perdition yet. Probably gonna wait to see a more impactful on hit or something I can just cover up for this health, and probably when it's combined with a more relevant contract. Although there are yellows you can hit, but there's not that many. We wiped all 3 Remorseless in their deck off of that, which is pretty good for us. And this is what I was saying. So you run more cards in the deck that you need isolates for than you actually run isolates, because I only run 6, so there's actually not that many. So because of that, I was pretty incentivized to arsenal it when I can, because now I can dominate Shakedown, which is pretty good. And we actually just saw the Codex, so that's another thing we talked about. This comes in for 11, and it has Inertia plus Blood Rot with the on hit. So we know we're blocking with these 3 cards. The question is, are we going to block are we going to full block out with Shakedown and just pass the turn back? Or are we going to block with the Mask of Perdition and the Flick Knives? Since we already used the Flick Knives, I'm actually pretty tempted to block with it here. Since we already cashed in the bite, and while we could get 1 more point of damage with the Nerve Scalpel, I'm not as interested in, letting 2 laces go through or giving up Tunic just so I can throw 1 more Scalpel in. All right. We're just going to name red every time. Oh, okay. Memorial Ground's pretty good, except I don't think there's that many relevant targets in Arsenal. I mean, there's red infecting, so their hand is going to go probably lace into infecting shot. So actually, I think that we take the lace here because their hand already wants to play an arrow that's not red in the ledger. So I think that we just take the lace. And that weakens their turn a lot. Sand has a lot of possibilities, but our most likely playline, if they don't dominate, is just going to be playing Codex to get Leave No Witnesses. Oh, they blind Azalea into a Read the Glide Path. Or that might have been left on top of deck. I'm not exactly sure. This possibility was left on top of deck because we took away their pump. And maybe now they're just going to try to play the red in the ledger instead. 11's pretty good here. We lose go again, unfortunately. But it doesn't have an aim counter. So we could We have enough life total and this on hit isn't that impactful. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna send the Fleece the Frail. Pop Mask on it, because there's probably no way they block it for 4, and then we're just gonna Arsenal the Codex, and then we have probably a game-winning hand next turn. Cool. We banished a Premeditate, so we're able to get some silver back. This is not a good hand for what we want. We really wanted a blue here, unfortunately. Okay, this is coming in for 10. I actually think we're just gonna... Pretty odd turn. I think at 4 life, it's going to be difficult for black text to really come online, but I think that they're better to have overall because our next hand can threaten 8 if they don't fully block out our contract card. So I'm more inclined to now get these back here. We're going to play Codex to go get... Yeah, just leave no menaces. There's maybe like some consideration to maybe go get Eradicate, but I don't really see much point. Sink Blow and Arsenal is also really good right here, especially because now we can flip the immovable out of Arsenal or out of our hand. Unfortunately, Release Attention is actually really good here, but this doesn't even have Dominate, so it's gonna be pretty standard here. Unfortunately, we don't have that good of a returning hand, but we at least are going to force 1 block, potentially 2. And if they want to go to 1. Going to 1 is a pretty big issue. It'd be more of a problem if we still had Flick Knives, but I'm happy with where we traded Flick Knives, and I'm happy that we found an early use case for it, so it didn't like sit around for too long, and then we had to block with it, and we still have 2 daggers up, so I'm happy that we cashed it in when it felt necessary. Golden Shot's good, but not good enough, and I think we just have lethal here, so we can just cover it up entirely. There's probably no reason that we needed to. It just seemed fun to end the game above 20 life, but I think this is going to be pretty easy to lock in at this point. We have black text, which is also the reason why we saved these until now, is that late game, when my opponent's not at 1, then something like this where they need to really play on that small margin threshold, it's pretty good. They did play around it correctly. It was a little tough, but I think we're just going to put... We're going to put the Plunder the Poor in Arsenal. The reason why is because I know that there's 1 immovable coming back at some point. No, we just got rid of it. So never mind. It actually doesn't make much sense. I guess the only other consideration is that we can pitch to the Scalpel. So here we can block. We could cash in the Tunic. And that way we're able to play Plunder the Poor, Threaten the Shred, and then get to Arsenal Death Touch. But then it doesn't really matter too much because we don't even have the blue regardless. So I think we just block like this, and then we're going to de-react it. And my opponent's almost out of cards. So it's also what I talked about in the deck tech, was that I'm trying to win through combat damage right now. I'm not trying to passively fatigue my opponent. But as a nature of so many of these contract cards hitting while you're being proactive, you know, I banished 13 cards from my opponent's deck. Like, that's a considerable amount. And now my opponent's down to less than 20 cards. But things like that add up over time. We're gonna leave this on top. Just in case my opponent blocks out a bunch on the following turn, then, like we said before, we can have a longer chain with E-Strike. So this is tough because we could shred here and put my opponent down to 1. This is really good. I don't know when else we would get value out of shred, but It's a tough decision to make. I'm inclined to do it right now. I would just rather get the opportunity when I can. Now we have pretty much a perfect hand that should be able to win the game here. My opponent is not able to arsenal. We have a nerve scalpel that has piercing, so they can't block with cross strap, so they'll have to block with a single card, and then we can play E-Strike for 5 into Codex, and that should be game. Unfortunately, we won't get to end the game above 20 life, but at this point, I'm just going to take the damage. And those 2 blood rots will have never, they'll never have existed this game. We could have blocked the black text. That should have happened, but regardless. We will get our death touch, and we will overkill by a large margin. So yeah, that's just a quick little game you can see here. We're actually doing somewhat decently on average value per turn. Keep in mind, some of these cards in the Assassin deck are pretty on rate, but the actual on hits are not, they're not calculated into the stats like this. Like, Shakedown both times, I believe, banished a 0 cost card, or the second one is the one I remember where we banished Blaze with Blood Rot, so that would have been a 0 for 5. So in essence, Shakedown was actually a 2 for 11 because we dealt 6, but we also prevented 5. So things like that are really strong and they add up. And that's not really something you would get from, like the Talishar stats. But hopefully this is like helpful for people who are maybe wondering how to actually, like, how does the playstyle work with a deck like this? So you can see I was like pretty cautious with my life total, but also like was just consistently pressuring. Trying to find lines where I was able to disrupt my opponent. Small micro things like arsenaling isolate when I had the ability to. Cash in Flick Knives both for damage and for blocking potential. And then sort of knowing where cards were in my deck, what my opponent was trying to do, and how to deny that strategy. But yeah, so if that makes sense at all, hopefully this game was helpful for that. But until next time, thank you for watching.